Hey crew, it's Pit, and I'm back with some more esoterica. Today we are diving back into the works of Mr. Rudolph Steiner. This is an outline of occult science we are reading aloud and discussing as we go along the various points brought to light by the text. It's not the format for everyone, but people do find value in it, so you are more than welcome to tag along as we continue our exploration. Before we begin, however, if you are unfamiliar with me, any of my unconventional beliefs, or if at any point in time I lose you in the terminology, there will be several playlists linked in the corner above, in the box down below, along with the original source material and the link from my book where I teach you to do magic responsibly, so that you can get a better understanding of who I am and why I say the things that I do. With that being said, we are going to dive in and continue our exploration of an outline of occult science with Chapter 2, The Nature of Man. With the consideration of man in the light of occult science, what this signifies in general immediately becomes evident. It rests upon the recognition of something hidden behind that which is revealed to the outer senses, and to the intellect acquired through perception. These senses and this intellect can apprehend only a part of all that which occult science unveils as the total human entity, and this part is the physical body. In order to throw light upon its conception of this body, occult science at first directs attention to a phenomenon which confronts all observers of life like a great riddle, the phenomena of death, and in connection with it points to so-called inanimate nature, the mineral kingdom. We are thus referred to facts which it devolves in occult science to explain, and to which an important part of this work must be devoted. But to begin with, only a few points will be touched upon by way of orientation. Within manifested nature, the physical body, according to occult science, is that part of man which is of the same nature as the mineral kingdom. On the other hand, that which distinguishes man from minerals is considered as not being part of the physical body. From the occult point of view, what is of supreme importance is the fact that death separates the human being from that which, during life, is of like nature with the mineral world. Occult science points to the dead body as that part of man which is to be found existing in the same way in the mineral kingdom. It lays strong emphasis upon the fact that in this principle of the human being, which it looks upon as the physical body, and which death reduces to a corpse, the same material and forces are at work as in the mineral realm. But no less emphasis is laid upon the fact that at death, disintegration of the physical body sets in. The occult scientist therefore says, "It is true that the same materials and forces are at work in the physical body as in the mineral, but during their life, their activity is placed at the disposal of something higher. They are left to themselves only when death occurs. Then they act, and they must in conformity with their own nature, as decomposers of the physical body." I don't disagree with most of this right now. I have my own interpretation of the Trinity. It will be linked in the top, the Divine and the Trinity explained, but the long and the short of it is this. Before the beginning there was God, and God was infinite and without bounds. And then God decided to create, and he limited himself from the infinite into the finite. That limiting from the infinite into the finite is the Spirit, right? From God to the Spirit. The Spirit is quite literally everything in existence, all in existence at exactly the same time. It is every single element, the minerals, in existence all at once, even out in space, right? All the space between the elements, all of that is the Holy Spirit. We can see that in part through change. There is inactive and active plasma, which is also spirit. The inactive plasma is things in stasis. It is not moving. It is not changing to a great degree. When we see that change, it is manifested often through light. We see that in the light bulbs that we use. That is electricity passing through a filament, creating illumination. We see that from the sun. It is light passing through the medium of exchange, which is the vacuum of space, and coming here. Right? That is light in motion. All of the elements are set into place, all at the beginning, in the very instant of creation. All of the elements were created. They were all here. None were created after, none will be created from that point forward. But none of them were combined. They were all independent atoms, all independently doing their independent thing. And then God decided, let there be light. And he said, I am the light. And he became the light. And the light was change. The light was logos. It was quite literally all of those elements set into motion and allowed to change. And we see that, right? The inactive is invisible. It is surrounding you right now. It is all of the air around you. But it contains potential. And when that potential is realized and the change occurs, we see lightning. We see fire. That is the physical signification of that change happening. Electricity is the spirit in motion. Fire is the spirit in motion. Change is the spirit in motion. When you breathe, that is the spirit making it happen. When your heart beats, it is the spirit making it happen. It is the electromagnetics of creation. All of that to say that, yes, this is a body. It is mortal. It will perish when your soul leaves it. You are here temporarily, voluntarily, for the experience of being here. And part of that experience is that, yes, you will die at some point. And the body will return to the elements from which it came. It's not important. What happens to the body? Not important. I know that steps on toes, but it is what it is. Whether you put it in a box, whether you burn it, whether you shoot it into space, makes no difference. I mean, shooting it into space kind of does, because it removes from the ecosystem the things that are contained within you, but it's a minor change, right? For the most part, it makes no difference. It doesn't. Whether you are cremated or put into the earth embalmed, the only difference is time for you to reassimilate to where you came from. The only reason we preserve is because we are scared of the afterlife, and that is dumb. And so while I am not in full accordance with Mr. Steiner's interpretations of things, it is close enough that we are in working accord. Back to the text. Sorry. Thus, a sharp distinction must be drawn between the manifested and the hidden elements in man. For during life, that which is hidden from view has to wage perpetual war on the materials and forces of the mineral world. This indicates the point at which occult science steps in. It has to characterize that which wages the war alluded to, as a principle which is hidden from sense observation. Clairvoyant sight alone can reveal its workings. Then it is completely unreliable. If you are the only one that can see it, it has no value. And that is coming from someone who has relayed what I have seen, right? If nobody else can replicate it, it's valueless, right? It's valuable to me. My personal experience is relative to my spiritual growth. I relay it because it might be relevant to yours. You may be able to replicate the things, right? Now, I'm not saying that you can replicate divine intervention, which was one of my things, right? But clairvoyant sight is, I'm going to look and see these things. It's one of the problems with prophecy, right? You are the one seeing it, you are the one interpreting it, and it may not be correct. You may be seeing something and not understanding it, right? You can only interpret prophecy, which is clairvoyance, according to your current understanding. So if you're looking 3,000 years into the future, you're probably not going to understand much of what you see. You may understand some of it, but you will not understand all of it. And if it is only being relayed by clairvoyant sight and not backed up by actual physical findings, then it is useless. Ed Casey, right, with his I see the tablets of Teote that is hidden in a chamber under the Sphinx. Absolutely useless. Does nothing for us unless we can go and find the chamber and retrieve the tablets. I can make up shit. John Smith made up shit about Mormonism. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John made up shit about Jesus. So why can't you just make up something? You can. And that's the problem. If it's not replicable, there's no point in it. You can relay it, by all means. Relay your information. See if someone else can replicate it. but clairvoyant sight alone can reveal its workings, that's just mass delusion. That is everybody agreeing what you have to see, and therefore you see it. Whatever. How man arrives at awareness of this hidden element as plainly as his ordinary eyes see the phenomena of sense will be described in a later part of this book. Now, I say that with a caveat, right? I have given tools. I have described the process by which I flex my third eye. It is described in the book. It is behind a paywall for a reason, but it is a thing that you can do. I maintain that what I do when I flex my third eye is release dimethyltryptamine, and I can alter reality. I can literally see things that may or may not be there. And so it is entirely subjective up to me, but I give you the tool so that you can see if you replicate it. I do believe that there is something to see because I have seen it, but I cannot maintain it as fact if only I have seen it. If only clairvoyant sight will reveal it to you, then it is useless. Right? You can use it as a starting point or a discussion point, but it is not fact unless it is repeatable. Results of clairvoyant observation will be given now for the reason already pointed out in the preceding pages. That is, that communications about the way in which the higher sight is obtained can only be of value to the student when he has first become acquainted, in the form of a narrative, with the results of clairvoyant research. For in this sphere it is quite possible to understand things which one is not yet able to observe. Indeed, the right path to higher vision starts with understanding. We're coming back. I have a problem right here. And I do. Do you know what it is? I bet you do if you've been paying attention to me, right? For in this sphere it is quite possible to understand things with which one is not yet able to observe. That is a truth, right? That is absolutely a true thing. You can understand concepts without having to see them. That is something that you can do. You can understand the concepts of mathematics without having worked a problem. It's a little bit harder, but you can do it. You can understand the concepts behind something without ever actually seeing the actual practical application of something, right? We know that transmutation from lead into gold has been done. We know that. We can observe that without understanding the processes by which it happens. So it is absolutely possible to understand things that you have not seen, but you should be able to see them. Now, what I have a problem with is this next part. The right path to higher vision starts with understanding. Well, that is just fucking bullshit. You don't understand anything before you learn about it. The path starts with a choice, then learning, then understanding. And so, to me, this is exactly wrong. This is saying, I already know the conclusions, let me draw the facts. Fuck you. Every single time. This is the problem with religion, right? This is my problem with the control system, right? I have determined that you are bound and determined to go to hell unless you accept this human sacrifice. You have to have the understanding that this human sacrifice had to happen for you to be forgiven from sin. Well, it turns out that's not true. It turns out that in almost every single chapter of the Old Testament of the Bible, it is repeated that there was not a sacrifice necessary. It was needed, but that is a difference. There is no necessity for you to sacrifice anything to be forgiven from sin. But if you believe that, then that is your understanding. And if you start from the understanding that that is something that has to be, then for you that has to be. But it's not real. It's not true. You are starting with the conclusion, and that is fucking dumb. Right? You should never start with the conclusion. You start with a hypothesis, you test and replicate, and then you come to a conclusion. You don't start with understanding, you start with learning. And first, you have to make a choice to learn. And before you can make the choice to learn, you have to realize there is something to learn. That's a whole lot of steps before understanding. You do not start with understanding. If you start with understanding, especially if you have the capacity to visualize, then you are going to see exactly what you were expecting to see. And that is a problem. And if you can tell, that gets me upset, right? I start with the explanation to lead to understanding. I do not start with understanding. Now, although the hidden something which wages war on the disintegration of the physical body can be observed only by the higher sight, it is plainly visible in its effects to the human faculty of judgment, which is limited to the manifested world. And these effects are expressed in the form or shape in which mineral materials and forces are combined during life. When death has intervened, the form disappears little by little and the physical body becomes part of the rest of the mineral world. But the clairvoyant is able to observe this hidden something as an independent member of the human organism, during which life prevents the physical materials and forces from taking their natural course, which would lead to the dissolution of the physical body. The independent principle is called the etheric or vital body. For me, that is the soul. Right? The soul is the individualized piece of divinity given to you to navigate 5D space in the temple of God. Right? The body is the temple, the soul is the part that makes the choices, and the spirit is the part that enacts those choices. Body, soul, spirit, 3 into 1. If misunderstandings are not to arise at the outset, 2 things must be borne in mind in connection with this account of a second principle of human nature. The word, etheric, is used here in a different sense from that of modern physics, which designates as ether the medium by which light is transmitted. In occult science, the use of the word is limited to the sense given above. It denotes that which is accessible to higher sight and can be known to physical observation only by its effects, that is, by its power of giving a definite form or shape to the mineral materials and forces present in the body. Again, the use of the word body must not be misunderstood. It is necessary to use the words of everyday language in describing things on a higher plane of existence, and these terms, when applied to sense observation, express only what is physical. The etheric body has, of course, nothing of bodily nature in the physical sense, however ethereal we might imagine such a body to be. As soon as the occultist mentions this etheric or vital body, he reaches the point at which he is bound to encounter the opposition of many contemporary opinions. I believe that there is a soul, right? That is not necessarily an etheric body. It can be. The interpretation is definitely up for interpretation. And so, the etheric body has nothing of a bodily nature. I believe that. However ethereal we might imagine the body to be. I don't believe this body is ethereal, right? It is here physically incarnated. You can touch it and feel it. So there's that. Now it is a temporary housing. Your soul is eternal. It came from somewhere. It returns to somewhere. That's the same place, not some eternal damnation. And so for me, the soul is there. You don't get to see it, right? It is, like, as far as I know, you don't ever get to see it. Even when you return, there may not be anything like that. The body is different from the soul. This is just the temporary housing that we are in. Now, and when you start talking about these things, though, you absolutely will run into opposition. People do not like these conversations at all. The development of the human mind has been such that the mention of such a principle of human nature is necessarily looked upon as unscientific. The materialistic way of thinking has arrived at the conclusion that there is nothing to be seen in a living body but a combination of physical substances and forces, such as are also found in the so-called inanimate body of the mineral. So-called is a good description. the only difference being that they are more complicated in the living than in the lifeless body. Yet, it is not very long since other views were held, even by official science. It is evident to anyone who studies the work of many earnest men of science produced during the first half of the 19th century that, at the time, many a genuine investigator of nature was conscious of some factor acting within the living body other than the lifeless mineral. It was termed vital force. It is true this vital force is not represented as being what has been above characterized as the vital body, but underlying the conception was a dim idea of the existence of such a body. Vital force was generally regarded as something which, in a living body, was united with physical matter and forces in the same way that the force of a magnet unites itself with iron. Then came the time when the vital force was banished from the domain of science. Mere physical and chemical causes were accounted all sufficient. At the present moment, however, there is a reaction in this respect in some scientific quarters. It is sometimes conceded that the hypothesis of something of the nature of vital force is not pure nonsense. Yet even the scientist who concedes this much is not willing to make common cause with the occultist with regard to the vital body. As a rule, it serves no useful purpose to enter upon a discussion of such views from the standpoint of occult science. It should be much more the concern of the occultist to recognize that the materialistic way of thinking is a necessary concomitant phenomenon of the greatest advance of natural science in our day. This advance was due to the vast improvements in the instruments used in sense observation, and it is in the very nature of man to bring some of his faculties to a certain degree of perfection at the expense of others. Exact sense observation, which has been evolved to such an important extent by natural science, was bound to leave in the background the cultivation of those human faculties which lead into the hidden worlds. But the time has come when this cultivation is once more necessary, and recognition of the invisible will not be won by combating opinions which are the logical outcome of a denial of its existence, but rather by setting the invisible in the right light. Then it will be recognized by those for whom the time has come. It was necessary to say this much in order that it may not be imagined that occult science is ignorant of the standpoint of natural science when mention is made of an etheric body, which in many circles must necessarily be considered as purely imaginary. Thus, the etheric body is the second principle of the human being. For the clairvoyant, it possesses a higher degree of reality than the physical body. A description of how it is seen by the clairvoyant can be given only in later parts of this book, when the sense in which such descriptions are to be taken will become manifest. For the present, it will be enough to say that the etheric body penetrates the physical body in all its parts, and is to be regarded as a kind of architect of the latter. All the physical organs are maintained in their form and shape by the currents and movements of the etheric body. Magnetism. The physical heart is based upon an etheric heart. Magnetism. The physical brain upon an etheric brain. Magnetism. And the physical, with this difference, that in the etheric body, the parts flow into one another in active motion, whereas in the physical body they are separated from each other. Again, magnetism. Man has this etheric body in common with all plants, just as he has the physical body in common with minerals. Everything living has an etheric body. So do the minerals. The study of occult science proceeds upwards from the etheric body to another principle of the human being. To aid in the formation of an idea of this principle, it draws attention to the phenomena of sleep, just as in connection with the etheric body attention was drawn to death. All human work, so far as the manifested world is concerned, is dependent upon activity during waking life. But that activity is possible only as long as a man is able to recuperate his exhausted forces by sleep. Action and thought disappear. pain and pleasure fade away during sleep, and, on reawakening, man's conscious powers ascend from the unconscious of sleep as though from hidden mysterious sources of energy. It is the same consciousness which sinks down into dim depths on falling asleep and ascends from them, again, on reawakening. That which awakens life again out of the state of unconsciousness is, according to occult science, the third principle of the human being. It is called the astral body. Just as the physical body cannot keep its form by means of the mineral substances and forces it contains, but must, in order to be kept together, be interpreted by the etheric body, so it is impossible for the forces of the etheric body to illuminate themselves with the light of consciousness. An etheric body left to its own resources would be in a permanent state of sleep. An etheric body awake is illuminated by an astral body. This astral body seems to sense observation to disappear when man falls asleep. To clairvoyant observation, it is still present, with the difference that it appears separated from or withdrawn out of the etheric body. Sense observation has nothing to do with the astral body itself, but only with its effects in the manifested world, and these cease during sleep. In the same sense in which man possesses his physical body in common with plants, he resembles animals as regards his astral body. Plants are in a permanent state of sleep. Not true. One who does not judge accurately in these matters may easily mistake of attributing to plants the same kind of consciousness as that of animals and human beings in the waking state. Right? It's not the same kind of consciousness, but it is a consciousness, right? Sunflowers follow the sun. Other plants have cycles as well. Some plants hunt, right? And yes, that is on an instinctual level. I'm not saying that they're making conscious choices, not in the same way that we do. But animals don't make conscious choices in the same way that we do either. They have the capacity, some of them, to be trained. Those on the fourth plane of existence, you can train them. They have the ability to anticipate things. The ones on the third plane, you can't train. They don't anticipate. And so that is a different experience within animals, right? We have a whole different experience, and we are animals. So I do believe that plants are conscious. They are doing what they can, but they are limited in what they can do. They don't have the understanding, so their consciousness is just different from ours. And yes, that's being pedantic about the terminology, but that is what I do, right? Plants do have a type of consciousness. We know that they have pain. We know that. We know that they communicate through mycelium networks that aren't even their own, right? This tree over here and this tree over here can communicate and share resources by mycelium from a mushroom. These are things that we know are true. That is plants acting at least with a little bit of consciousness. Yes, on an instinctual level, but so are frogs and cats. All right, back to the text. But this assumption can only be due to an inaccurate conception of consciousness. Okay, maybe I should have kept reading. In that case, it is said, if an external stimulus is applied to a plant, it responds by certain movements, as would an animal. Yeah, maybe I should have just kept reading. That's not the first time that's happened. The sensitiveness of some plants is spoken of, for example, of those which contract their leaves when certain external things act upon them. Mimosa hostilis, for example, the largest container of dimethyltryptamine in the North American continent. The sensitiveness of some plants is spoken of, for example, of those which contract their leaves when certain external things act upon them. I do not think that it is coincidental that this plant that reacts with some conscious type of energy, right, the contracting of the leaves, and the fact that it contains the most dimethyltryptamine, I don't think that those are coincidental. But the characteristic mark of consciousness is not that a being reacts in a certain way to an impression, but that it experiences something in its inner nature, which adds a new element to mere reaction. Otherwise, we should be able to speak of the consciousness of a pile of iron when it expands under the influence of heat. Consciousness is present only when, through the effect of heat, that being feels pain or pleasure inwardly. That is not necessarily true, right? That can be a definition that can be applied, but it is not necessarily the only definition that can be applied. Yes, it is a symbol of consciousness that pain produces an effect. Yes, that is why I emphatically stated that plants, right, have that capacity, at least a small bit. I believe that we see that with elements and we do not understand it, right? If there is an energetic infusion, heat, for instance, being applied, how do we know that the expansion is not painful, right? Just because we don't have an outward expression of pain is not sufficient. That does not mean that it is not present. I quite often do not give any indication of pain. It's one of the things that I am built with. That does not mean that I do not feel pain. The fourth principle of being, which occult science attributes to man, is one which he does not share in common with the rest of the manifested world. It is that which differentiates him from his fellow creatures and makes him the crown of creation. That is an assumption that you are making. There is no reason to assume that humans are the epitome of creation. That is an assumption that you make based upon our intelligence, based upon our thought processes, and while it is logical, that does not mean that it is correct. It is extremely likely that there are beings that have more consciousness than us, right? More of a will, more of a ability to enact that will, right? I believe that there is 2 levels of existence above ours. Now, that is me maintaining my beliefs, confirmation bias, but I have reasons to believe that, right? There are stories of genies, right? And these genies can give you anything. Where do they get it? Where does that come from? Can you do that? Can you just make something out of nothing? Can you summon something from somewheres and you don't know where it's at? You can't. But we have stories of these genies that have. So at least we have a story of someone with more of a crown of creation than us. They were able to literally create out of nothing. Now, is that true? I don't know. But is it possible? Yes. This is an anthropomorphization, right? God is a man because we are men, and therefore God made us to look like him. Who's to say God is not a dog? Who is to say that God is not a lizard? Right? Are you to say that? Have you met God face to face? Have you had a conversation with a man? Hopefully the point is made. Occult science helps in forming a conception of this further principle of human nature by pointing out the existence of an essential difference between the kinds of experience in waking life. On the one hand, man is constantly subjected to experiences which must of necessity come and go. On the other, he has experiences with which this is not the case. The fact comes out with special force if human experiences are compared with those of animals. An animal experiences the influences of the outer world with great regularity. Under the influence of heat and cold, it becomes conscious of pain or pleasure, and during certain regularly recurring bodily processes, it feels hunger and thirst. The sum total of a man's life is not exhausted by such experiences. He is able to develop desires and wishes which go beyond things. In the case of an animal, it would always be possible, on going far enough into the matter, to ascertain the cause, either within or without its body, which impelled it to any given act or feeling. This is by no means the case with man. I disagree with that. He may, you can root cause most things. Now, saying all would be a big thing, right? I don't really do big statements like that, but I have not yet found an action or reaction or an emotion that I could not root cause. Now, sometimes that means that you have to open your mind to possibilities that you do not want to consider, And that can prohibit you from root causing, but that doesn't mean that you can't do it. It just means that you won't do it. And so, in the exact same way that you can ascertain the cause for whatever feeling or reaction you get from the animal, you can do the same thing with a man. That I emphatically stand on. He may engender wishes and desires for which no adequate cause exists either inside or outside the body. A particular source must be found for everything in this domain, and according to occult science, this source is to be found in the human I, or ego. Therefore, ego will be spoken of as the fourth principle of the human being. The ego is the soul. It is the part that makes the decisions. It is the part that is you. That is the soul, the individualized piece of divinity that was given the 5D navigation device for you to use. Were the astral body left to its own resources, feelings of pleasure and pain and sensations of hunger and thirst would take place within it, but there would be lacking the consciousness of something lasting in all of these feelings. It is not the permanent as such, which is here designated as the ego, but rather that which experiences this permanent element. In this domain, conceptions must be very exactly expressed if misunderstandings are not to arise. With the becoming aware of something permanent, lasting, within the changing inner experiences begins the dawn of ego consciousness. The sensation of hunger, for instance, cannot give a creature the feeling of having an ego. Hunger sets in when the recurring causes make themselves felt in the being concerned, which then devours its food just because these recurring conditions are present. For the ego consciousness to arise, there must not only be these recurring conditions, urging the being to take food, but there must have been pleasure derived from previous satisfaction of hunger. And the consciousness of pleasure must have remained, so that not only the present experience of hunger, but the past experience of pleasure urges the being to take nourishment. I'm gonna do something here. I'm a dog guy. I've got dogs. I've had a couple that passed, and I got a couple brand new ones. And you know what they have in common? The first time that they get cheese, they remember cheese. They remember exactly that they love cheese. And any time that I reach into the refrigerator and I unfold a cheese wrapper, they will come from the other end of the house because they remember getting pleasure from eating cheese. What does that mean for our theory here? Maybe there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about what the ego actually is. The ego is the part that makes the decisions, right? Whether that is making a decision for you, or a dog making a decision for a dog, or a lizard making a decision for a lizard. The part that is making the decision is the ego. Now, the level of self-awareness of that ego can differ, right? I don't believe that a dog is on the same cognition level that we are, but you can train a dog. A dog can be taught to anticipate time. That is real. And so that is at least this level of understanding of ego. Back to the text. Just as the physical body falls into decay if the etheric body does not keep it together, and as the etheric body sinks into unconsciousness if not illuminated by the astral body, so the astral body would necessarily allow the past to be lost in oblivion unless the ego rescued the past by carrying it over into the present. What death is to the physical body and sleep to the etheric, the power of forgetting is to the astral body. We may put this in another way and say that life is the special characteristic of the etheric body, consciousness of the astral body, and memory that of the ego. It is still easier to make the mistake of attributing memory to an animal than that of attributing consciousness to a plant. Wait, what? And see, dogs do have memory. You cannot disabuse me of that notion. It is not like the Pavlovian response is that. I understand that people believe that is creating an instinct. That is a memory pattern repeated. I'm just saying, like, it's quite literally something we have proven. Dogs do have memory. They remember their name. They can remember sound patterns. Right? My dog recognizes my footsteps. They don't have memory. Are you fucking kidding me? Now, the third plane, there's not a whole lot of memory there. I will fully grant that. But on the fourth plane, yeah, they definitely have some memory. It is so natural to think of memory when a dog recognizes its master, whom perhaps it has not seen for some time. Yet, in reality, the recognition is not due to memory at all, but to something quite different. The dog feels a certain attraction towards its master, which proceeds from the personality of the latter. Okay, yeah, see, this is one of those no, right? This is a rationalization that is not correct. Dogs do remember things. This is something that I can empirically prove. The cheese wrapper is that, right? Even an instinct is a compounded repeating pattern. A new instinct does not develop in the dog itself. It develops in the progeny of the dog, right? If Pavlov's response was truly instinctual, it would not be the response in this dog. What would happen was this dog would have a litter of dogs, and they would pass on the survival instinct of the Pavlovian response. That is not instinct. That is memory. That is a dog remembering that the bell means food. That is the dog remembering that the cheese wrapper means food. This is not your presence that the dog remembers. The dog remembers you. Birds remember you. Not all of them, but ravens will. Piss off a raven and see what happens. Piss off a magpie and see what happens. Right? A mockingbird. Any of those will remember you. They will take retribution on you. You mess with a mockingbird one time, and every time that bird sees you in particular, whether you have a beard or you shave it, whether you have hair or you shave it, no matter what clothing you are wearing, that bird will recognize you. That bird will remember you in particular, as opposed to another human. And that is a fact. Like, I don't even have to couch that in speculation. That part is true. This is a misunderstanding. He does not understand what he is talking about here. That doesn't mean that he doesn't have insights on other things, but this is a no. This gives the dog a sense of pleasure whenever its master is present, and every time this happens, it is the cause of a repetition of the pleasure. Alright, here's another one. You shouldn't be picking on my dogs, bruh. There are service animals, right? We have dogs that we use for different things, and that's not even the point. Many times during the course of service, the dog will lose its master. What has been repeatedly observed, particularly from service animals, no matter what the service is that they mourn this person to the point of remembering where they were buried. Right? They never saw the body in the fucking casket, but they know that the body is in the casket. They remember this person. There are dogs that see a picture of somebody and remember them. That's not some instinctual, well, I'm getting pleasure from the presence of. That's not I have this overarching personality of. That is this dog remembers me. And that is real. That is the thing that happens. Dogs will lie at the feet, at the casket of the person that they didn't see in it. That happens. It's not always pleasure, is it? But memory only exists in a being when he not only feels his present experiences, but retains those of the past. And you are making an assumption that they don't. Right? That is an assumption. You are making an assumption that they don't. A person might admit this and yet fall into error of thinking the dog has memory. For it might be said that the dog pines when its master leaves it, and therefore it retains a remembrance of him. It does. This, too, is an inaccurate opinion. Living with its master has made his presence a condition of a well-being to the dog. It feels his absence much in the same way in which it feels hunger. No, dogs have favorites. Sophie, my black dog, she likes my wife much more than me. Merlin, my dog that recently passed away, that was my dog. He was all about me. It was not my wife feeds it, right? It wasn't about the food. My wife gives him attention. It wasn't about the attention. I was his favorite person. She's her favorite person, right? One who does not make these distinctions will not arrive at a clear understanding of the true condition of life. I hold that in the exact opposite association. Right? I have the theory of spiritual evolution for a reason. I have spent a considerable amount of time on it. I do not hold a degree, unlike Dr. Steiner, right? But that doesn't mean the doctors are correct all of the time, most of the time even. Some of the time they are uneducated, even in their own specialty. That happens a lot. Many people, especially gynecologists, are not read up on their highest understanding of the craft. They are not fully aware of all of the medical procedures. Memory and forgetfulness have for the ego much the same significance that waking and sleeping have for the astral body. Just as sleep vanishes into nothingness, the cares and troubles of the day. Is that what it does? Is that what happens? It vanishes into nothingness? Is that what happens? You don't have dreams about the things that happen to your day ever? Really? You don't process the things that have occurred in your sleep at all? Really? Okay. So does forgetfulness draw a veil over the sad experiences of life and efface part of the past. And just as sleep is necessary for the recuperation of the exhausted vital forces, so must a man blot out from his memory certain portions of his past life if he is to face his new experiences freely and without prejudice. It is out of this very forgetfulness that strength arises for the perception of new facts. Let us take the case of learning to write. All of the details which a child has to go through in this process are forgotten. Well, I can dispute that shit too. I have at least my own experience to draw upon, and I do remember learning to write. Maybe it's because I'm left-handed and that caused so much problems as I was coming through school. Right? Being left-handed was a significant hindrance in my life. And maybe that is why, but I do absolutely remember most of the steps of learning to write. Now, I don't visualize them. I remember them. I have the conceptualization of them. I remember getting fussed at for doing it incorrectly. I remember the struggle of trying to make it in the right manner. I remember the struggle of trying to keep it from getting on my hand and smudging as I went across. I remember learning to write. And so I can speak from experience. I do not forget the details. Maybe some of them, but not all of them. All the details. Fuck you and your big statements. What remains is the ability to write. And what we're seeing here, right, from the animal thing to this, is you already have a conclusion and you are working towards it. Well, that's what I was bitching about earlier, right? You have this conclusion that you have already drawn and now you are working towards it. Now, I have conclusions, right? I fully admit that I have conclusions that I present, but I do try to couch them in speculation. Now, I cannot prove to you that a dog can think, but I can show you why I think that a dog can think. I can replicate that for you, and you can replicate that on your own. It's pretty close to observable, objective fact. There are many parts of that that are going to be supposition. That is fully granted. Now, I have things that I believe that I talk about all of the time, and I try to express them in a way that explains why, right? This isn't doing that. This is just saying, this is the assertion, this is what you should take from it. Dogs don't have memory. That's an assertion, and then he makes an example trying to prove that. Dogs don't have feelings, and then he makes an assertion trying to prove that. Now, I'm doing the same thing when I talk about this theory of spiritual evolution, but I say it as I believe that these things. I want to believe these things. I have this evidence. See if you can reproduce it. This isn't evidence-based. This is feelings-based. I've already got the idea. Now I've already got the understanding. Now I can seek the experience, right? I've already got the conclusion. Why go through the hypotheses? How would a person ever be able to write if each time he took up his pen, all his experiences in learning to write rose up before his mind? That is not exactly the same thing, right? Remembering the details does not mean that you remember them every single time that you go to do it. The instinctual mind does take over, repeated patterns, right? You learn how to write, and then you write by instinct. Now, that is misusing the term instinct because we just defined it, right? Instinct is what is passed on. If you are born knowing how to do something, that is instinct, right? Dogs are born knowing how to hunt. They are born knowing how to associate with each other. There's a little bit of training and teaching, but for the most part, they understand intrinsically. It's an instinct. Babies are born knowing how to latch onto a tit. It is instinct. They are born knowing to cry when there's a problem. It is instinct. It's not a taught thing. If it is taught, it's not instinctual. Now, repeated practice over time leads to near instinctual reactions. That is the sleeping mind taking over. If you're unfamiliar with the sleeping mind concept, it's the part that allows you to catch a ball, right? If someone were to stand over there and they're like, okay, I'm 15 feet away from you. I'm going to make a throwing motion. I'm going to use X amount of force. I want you to predict where this ball would go. You're not going to be able to do that. It relies on too many variables that are uncontrolled. You're not going to be able to say it's going to go right here. But somebody can throw a ball at you from 100 feet away at a speed that you can barely register. And you will know instinctually where to go. Your hand will fly out and you'll catch the ball. That's the sleeping mind. It's not you interfering with things. That's not instinct. That is the sleeping mind taking over. That's you consciously not being in the way of this thing happening. That's not an instinct. It's a learned reaction. Instinct is what you know how to do with no training. You don't catch a ball with no training. As a matter of fact, something gets thrown at you, your instinct is to not be in the way. Right? You have to train yourself to be in the way, to intercept the ball. But once you have done that with a repeated pattern, the mind takes over and you do it without thinking. It's the same with writing, right? You're not consciously thinking about the things because your subconscious mind is doing it for you. All right, back to the text. Now, there are many different degrees of memory. The simplest form is manifest when a person perceives an object and, after turning away from it, retains its image in his mind. He formed the image while looking at the object. A process was then carried out between his astral body and his ego, and the astral body lifted into consciousness the outward impression of the object. But knowledge of the object would last only as long as the thing itself was present, unless the ego absorbed the knowledge into itself and made it its own. It is at this point that occult science draws the dividing line between what belongs to the body and what belongs to the soul. It speaks of the astral body as long as it is a question of the gaining of knowledge from an object which is present. But what gives knowledge duration is known as soul. From this, it can at once be seen how close is the connection in man between the astral body and that part of the soul which gives a lasting quality to knowledge. The two are, to a certain extent, united into one principle of human nature. Consequently, the unity is often denoted the astral body. When exact terms are desired, the astral body is called the soul body, and the soul, insofar as it is united with the latter, is called the sentient soul. The ego rises to a higher stage of its being when it centers its activity on what it has gained for itself out of its knowledge of objective things. It is by means of this activity that the ego detaches itself, more and more, from the objects of perception, in order to work within that which is its own possession. The part of the soul on which this work devolves is called the rational or intellectual soul. It is the peculiarity of the sentient and the intellectual souls that they work with that which they receive through sense impressions of external objects of which they retain the memory. The soul is then wholly surrendered to something which is really outside it. Even what has made its own through memory, it has actually received from without. But it is able to go beyond all this, and occult science can most easily give an idea of this, drawing attention to a simple fact which, however, is of the greatest importance. It is that in the whole range of speech there is but one name that is distinguished by its very nature from all other names. It is the name I. Every other name can be applied to anyone, by anyone, to the thing or being to which it belongs. The word I, as the designation of a being, has a meaning only when it is given to that being by himself. Never can any outside voice call us by the name of I. We can apply it only to ourselves. I am only an I to myself. To everyone else, I am a you, and everyone else is a you to me. This fact is the outward expression of a deeply significant truth. The real essence of the ego is independent of everything outside of it, and it is on this account that its name cannot be applied to it by anyone else. This is the reason why those religions' confessions, which have consciously maintained their connections with occult science, speak the word I as the unutterable name of God. For the fact above mentioned is exactly what is referred to when this expression is used. Nothing outward has access to that part of the human soul of which we are now speaking. It is the hidden sanctuary of the soul. Only a being of like nature with the soul can win entrance there. The divinity dwelling in man speaks when the soul recognizes itself as an ego. Just as the sentient and intellectual souls live in the outer world, so a third soul principle is immersed in the divine when the soul becomes conscious of its own nature. In this connection, a misunderstanding may easily arise. It may seem as though occult science interpreted the ego to be one with God, but it is by no means says that the ego is God, only that it is of the same nature and essence of God. Now, I maintain that the soul is the individualization that God has given you, right? You are a tiny fragment of God, and so this is a reiteration of that in large part, right? The ego is not God. What I believe is me is not God, but it is a part of God. It is a small, tiny part of God, but it is of the same nature and essence as God, just not the fullness of God. Does anyone declare a drop of water taken from the ocean to be the ocean, when he asserts that the drop and the ocean are the same in essence or substance? If a comparison is needed, we may say, the ego is related to God as the drop of water is to the ocean. I agree. Man is able to find a divine element within himself because his original essence is derived directly from the divine. Thus, man, through the third principle of his soul, attains an inner knowledge of himself, just as through his astral body he gains knowledge of the outer world. For this reason, occult science calls the third soul principle the consciousness soul, and it holds that the soul part of man consists of three principles: the sentient, intellectual, and consciousness souls, just as the body part has three principles: physical, etheric, and astral bodies. Now, for me, these three things are the body, the soul, and the spirit. The real nature of the ego is first revealed in the consciousness soul. Through feeling and reason, the soul loses itself in other things, but as the consciousness soul, it lays hold of its own essence. Therefore, the ego can only be perceived through the consciousness soul by certain inner activity. The images of external objects are formed as those objects come and go, and the images go on working in the intellect by virtue of their own force. But if the ego is to perceive itself, it cannot merely surrender itself. It must first, by inner activity, draw of its own being out of its depths in order to become conscious of it. A new activity of the ego begins with this self-cognition, with self-recollection. Owing to this activity, the perception of the ego in the consciousness soul possesses an entirely different meaning for man from that conveyed by the observation of all that reaches him through the three bodily principles and the two other soul principles. The power which reveals the ego in the consciousness soul is, in fact, the same power which manifests everywhere else in the world. Only in the body and the lower soul principles it does not come forth directly, but is manifested little by little in its effects. The lowest manifestation is through the physical body. Thence, a gradual ascent is made to that which fills the intellectual soul. Indeed, we may say that with each ascending step, one of the veils falls away in which the hidden center is wrapped. In that which fills the consciousness soul, this hidden center emerges unveiled in the temple of the soul. Yet, it shows itself just here to be but a drop from the ocean of the all-pervading primordial essence. It is here that man first has to grasp it, this primordial essence. He must recognize it in himself before he is able to find it in his manifestations. That which penetrates into the consciousness soul like a drop from the ocean is called by occult science spirit. In this way is the consciousness soul united with the spirit, which is the hidden principle in all manifested things. If man wishes to lay hold of the spirit in all manifestation, he must do it in the same way in which he lays hold of the ego in the consciousness soul. He must extend to the visible world the activity which has led him to the perception of his ego. By this means he evolves to a yet higher planes in his being. He adds something new to the principles of his soul and body. The first thing that happens is that he himself conquers what lies hidden in his lower soul principles, and this is effected through the work which the ego carries on within the soul. How man is engaged in this work becomes evident if we compare a high-minded idealist with a person who is still given up to low desires and so-called sensual pleasures. The latter becomes transmuted into the former if he withdraws from certain lower tendencies and turns to higher ones. He thus works through his ego upon his soul, thereby ennobling and spiritualizing it. The ego has become the master of that man's soul life that may be carried so far that no desire or wish can take root in the soul unless the ego permits its entrance. In this way, the whole soul becomes a manifestation of the ego, which previously only the consciousness soul had been. All civilized life and all spiritual effort really consist in the one work which has for its object to make the ego the master. Everyone now living is engaged in this work whether he wishes it or not, and whether he or not is conscious of the fact. Again, by this work, human nature is drawn upward to higher states of being. Man develops new principles of his being. These lie hidden from him behind what is manifest. If man is able, by working upon his soul, to make his ego master of it, so that the latter brings into manifestation what is hidden, the work may extend yet farther to include the astral body. In that case, the ego takes possession of the astral body by uniting itself with the hidden wisdom of this astral principle. In occult science, the astral body which is thus conquered and transformed by the ego is called the spirit self. This is the same as what is known as manas in theosophical literature, a term borrowed from the wisdom of the East. In the spirit self, a higher principle is added to human nature, one which is present as though in the germ, and which, in the course of work of the human being on itself, comes forth more and more. Man conquers his astral body by pushing through the hidden forces lying behind it. A similar thing happens at a later stage of development to the etheric body. But the work on the latter is more arduous, for it is hidden in the etheric body, is enveloped in two veils. But what is hidden in the astral body in only one? Occult science gives an idea to the difference in the work on the two bodies by pointing out certain changes which may take place in man in the course of his development. Let us at first think of the way in which certain soul qualities of man develop when the ego works upon the soul. How pleasures and desires, joys and sorrows may change. We have only to look back to our childhood. What gave us pleasure then? What caused us pain? What have we learned in addition to what we knew as children? All this is but an expression of the way in which the ego has gained mastery over the astral body. For it is this principle which is the vehicle of pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow. Compared with these things, how little in the course of time do certain other human qualities change. For example, the temperament, the deeper peculiarities of the character and like qualities. A passionate child will often retain certain tendencies to sudden anger during its development in later life. This is such a striking fact that there are thinkers who entirely deny the possibility of changing the fundamental character. They are wrong. I have done that. They assume that it is something permanent throughout life and that it is merely a question of its being manifested in one way or another. But such an opinion is due to defective observation. To one who is capable of seeing such things, it is evident that even the character and temperament of a person may be transformed under the influence of his ego. It is true that this change is slow in comparison with the change in the qualities before mentioned. We may compare the relation to each other of the rates of change in the two bodies to the movements of the hour hand and the minute hand of the clock. Now the forces which bring about a change of character or temperament belong to the hidden forces of the etheric body. They are of the same nature as the forces which govern the kingdom of life, the same, therefore, as the forces of growth, nutrition, and generation. Further explanations in this work will throw the right light on these things. Thus, it is not when man simply gives himself up to pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, that the ego is working on the astral body, but when the peculiarities of these qualities of the soul are changed. And the work is extended in the same way to the etheric body when the ego applies its energies to changing the character or temperament. This change, too, is one in which every living person is engaged, whether consciously or not. The most powerful incitement to this kind of change in ordinary life is that given by religion. If the ego allows the impulses which flow from religion to work upon it again and again, they become a power within it which extends to the etheric body and changes it as lesser impulses in life affect the transformation of the astral body. These lesser impulses, which come to man through study, reflection, and the ennobling of feeling and so on, are subject to the manifold changes of existence, but religious feelings impress a certain stamp of uniformity upon all thinking, feeling, and willing. They diffuse an equal and single light over the whole life of the soul. Man thinks and feels one thing today, another tomorrow, the causes of which are of many different kinds, but one who consistently holding to his religious convictions has a glimpse of something which persists through all the changes, will relate his thoughts and feelings of today, as well as his experiences of tomorrow, to that fundamental feeling he possesses. Thus, religious belief has the power of permeating the whole of the soul life. Its influences increase in strength as time goes on because they are constantly repeated. Hence, they acquire the power of working upon the etheric body. In a similar way, the influences of true art work upon man. If, going beyond the outer form, color, and tone of a work of art, he penetrates to its spiritual foundations with his imagination and feeling, then the impulses thus received by the ego actually reach the etheric body. When this thought is followed out to its logical conclusion, the immense significance of art in all human evolution may be estimated. Only a few instances are pointed out here of what induces the ego to work upon the etheric body. There are many similar influences in human life which are not so apparent at first glance, but these instances are enough to show that there is yet another principle of man's hidden nature within him, which the ego is making more and more manifest. Occult science denotes this second principle of the spirit of the life spirit. It is the same which in current theosophical literature is called buddhi, the term borrowed from Eastern wisdom. The expression life spirit is appropriate because the same forces are at work within it as are active in the vital body, with the difference that when they are manifesting in the latter, the ego is not active. When, however, these powers express themselves as the life spirit, they are interpenetrated by the ego. Man's intellectual development, the purification and ennobling of his feelings, and the manifestations of his will are the measure of the degree in which he has transformed the astral body into the spirit self. His religious experiences, as well as many others, are stamped upon the etheric body, making it into the life spirit. In the ordinary course of life, this happens more or less unconsciously. So-called initiation, on the contrary, consists in man being directed by occult science to the means through which he may, quite consciously, take in hand this work in the spirit self and life spirit. These means will be dealt with in latter parts of the book. In the meantime, it is important to show that, besides the soul and the body, the spirit is working within man. It will be seen later how the spirit belongs to the eternal part of man, as contrasted to the perishable body. But the work of the ego on the astral and the etheric bodies does not exhaust its activity, which is also extended to the physical body. A slight effect of the influence of the ego on the physical body may be seen when certain experiences cause a person to blush or turn pale. In this case, the ego is actually the occasion of a process in the physical body. Now, if through the activity of the ego in man changes occur and influence in the physical body, the ego is really united with the hidden forces of the physical body, that is, with the same forces which bring about its physical processes. Occult science says that during such activity, the ego is working on the physical body. This expression must not be misunderstood. It must on no account be supposed that this work is of a grossly material nature. What appears as gross material in the physical body is merely the manifested part of it. Behind this are the hidden forces of his being, which are of a spiritual nature. When the ego puts forth its energies in the manner described, it unites itself, not with the outer material manifestation of the physical body, but with the invisible forces which bring that body into being, and afterwards cause it to decay. This work of the ego on the physical body can only very partially become clear to man's consciousness in ordinary life. It become fully clear only when, under the influence of occult science, man consciously takes the work into his own hands. Then he becomes aware that there is a third spiritual principle within him. It is that which occult science calls the spirit man, as contrasted with the physical man. In theosophical literature, this spirit man is known as Atma. Again, with regard to spirit man, it is easy to make a mistake. In the physical body, we see man's lowest principle, and on this account find it hard to realize that the work on that body should be accomplished by the highest principle of the human entity. But just because the spirit active within the physical body is hidden under three veils, the highest kind of human effort is needed in order to make the ego one with that which is the hidden spiritual energy of the body. Occult science, therefore, represents man as being composed of many principles. Those of a bodily nature are the physical body, the etheric or vital body, the astral body. The soul principles are the sentient soul, the intellectual or rational soul, the consciousness soul. It is in the soul that the ego diffuses its light. Of a spiritual nature are the spirit self, the life spirit, the spirit man. It follows from what was said above that the sentient soul and the astral body are closely united and in a certain sense are one. Similarly, the consciousness soul and the spirit self form a whole. For in the consciousness soul the spirit shines forth, and thence irradiates with its light the other principles of the human being. Hence, occult science also speaks of man's organization as follows. The intellectual soul is simply called the ego because it partakes of the nature of the ego, and in a certain sense is the ego, yet not yet conscious of its spiritual nature, We thus have 7 divisions of man. 1, the physical body. 2, the etheric or vital body. 3, the astral body. 4, the ego. 5, the spirit self. 6, the life spirit. And 7, the spirit man. Even one accustomed to materialistic habits of thought would not find in this sevenfold organization of man the fanciful magic often attributed to the number 7. If one would only keep strictly to the meaning of the above explanations without himself injecting arbitrarily the idea of something magical into the matter. I do that. I'm not going to get into it because this is already long, but we have playlists. Occult science speaks of these 7 principles of man in exactly the same way, only from a standpoint of a higher form of observation of the world, as allusion is commonly made to the 7 colors that make up white light, or to the 7 notes of the scale, the octave being regarded as a repetition of the key note. Yes, the octave contains all 8 notes. As light appears in 7 colors, actually there is more than 7, right? White is a color. And sound in 7 tones, so the unity of man's nature manifested in the 7 principles described. No more superstition attaches to the number 7 in the case of occult science than when associated with the spectrum or with the scale. And once again, the octave is 8 and the spectrum is 8. On one occasion, when these facts were put forward verbally, the objection was made that the statement about the number 7 does not apply to colors, since there are others beyond the red and violet rays, invisible to the eye. Those are repetitions. That is not what I am talking about. There are 8 colors: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, and white. Everything else is a variation of those tones. But, even in this respect, the comparison with colors holds good, for in fact, the human being expands beyond the physical body on the one side, and beyond the spirit man on the other, only to the methods of spiritual observation of which occult science here speaks, are these extensions of the human being spiritually invisible, just as the colors beyond red and violet are physically invisible. This explanation becomes necessary because the opinion so easily arises that occult science does not seriously apply itself to scientific thinking, but treats such matters unscientifically. That has been the truth, right? I am attempting to change that. I try to do this in a scientific manner. That's why I describe the methods in ways that are repeatable. However, one who carefully considers the meaning of the statements made by occult science will find that in reality, it is never at variance with genuine science. Neither when it brings forward the facts of natural science as illustrations, nor when its statements are directly connected with natural research. And that's going to bring us to the end of Chapter 2. Hopefully I brought a little bit of enlightenment and not too much confusion to a somewhat difficult series of topics. I understand. I hold some unconventional beliefs, and I have a tendency to step on toes when I relay those. It's not intentional, it's just who I am, and I do not apologize for it. To me, the number 7 does have significance, but it's not the most important one. There is a number of manifestation. It is 1, 3, 8. 8 takes into accordance all 8 colors. It takes into accordance the various separations of the earth, right? The physical part of the earth, the core and the mantle and all of that, 7 divisions. The atmosphere of the earth, 7 divisions. There are 7 divisions within yourself. And then the 8th is the repeating pattern, right? So the core begins at the core and it ends with water. That's the 8th level. It's the beginning of the next one. The next one begins with water and it ends with space. That is a repeating pattern. The 7, which is actually 8. We see that with the octave, right? There are 7 notes in the scale, but 8 is the octave every time. We see that repeated with the colors, right? You can break white light into 7 different ones, but it came from one. Black is the absence of color, so that's a little bit different. Black and white are kind of the same. Without the one, there is not the other. But white is definitely a color, right? It is the color from which we derive all the rest of them. This is not a blue shirt. This shirt is reflecting blue, and it is absorbing every other color but blue. This is not blue. That is your perception of it. That is one of the problems, right? The number 8 is vitally important. There are 7 internal chakras. There is 1 external one. Those are necessary for manifestation. That is the method of magic that I use. That is what I have taught, and it has worked. I'm not talking about speculation. I'm talking about things that I have put into play. Now, it remains in the realm of speculation until other people replicate it, but for me it is established fact. I have done things. Those things were because of this understanding of the number 8, not the number 7. I believe that the number 7 was put there by the control system to keep you from learning true knowledge. And that is something that we might have to dig into one day. But for now, we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. If you like what I'm doing over here, let me know down below. Give me a like, a share, a follow. Throw me a comment if you agree or disagree with anything that was stated. Put it in the box. And if it remains respectful, it gets to remain up. I got to reiterate that. If you really like what I'm doing over here, hit me with that super thanks. Consider joining for a membership or picking up a copy of my book where I teach you how to do things. To the crew, thanks for hanging out. I appreciate every single minute that you are here with me, and I am praying for you every single day. Until next time, I love you. God loves you. You are perfect, whole, and complete just the way that you are. And this has been Pitt State. Peace.